Brazil's recently appointed education minister resigned just 5 days after being appointed by President Jair Bolsonaro. The International Labour Organization has stressed that the equivalent of 400 million full-time jobs have been lost during the first half of this year. Leaders of the G5 Sahel Joint Force held a meeting in Mauritania on Tuesday to address readiness to combat terrorism across the Greater Sahara area. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Brazil's recently appointed education minister resigned from the post after public complaints about inconsistencies in his academic resume. Carlos Alberto de Cotelli's resignation comes just 5 days after he was appointed by President Jair Bolsonaro. He came under scrutiny when one of the universities he said he'd graduated from in Argentina denied having awarded him a degree. Other accusations also indicate that his master's thesis, defended at the Getulio Vargas Foundation, was plagiarized. And according to a survey conducted by Brazil's Folha de Sao Paulo newspaper, 47% of citizens report being very afraid of contracting the novel coronavirus. 51% of those questioned also stated that they only leave home when it is unavoidable, while only 12% said that they are totally isolated during this period. According to the research, the proportion of people who say they are very afraid is higher among the poorest citizens. Peru is set to end its mandatory lockdown on Wednesday, although several provinces will remain under a state of emergency. 7 departments will continue on lockdown from July 1st through July 31st. Adults aged 65 and over, children under the age of 14, and those with pre-existing health issues will remain under lockdown. President Martin Vizcarra stressed during a press conference that the threat of the coronavirus was not over, urging people to use masks to protect themselves. Peru has registered over 285,000 positive cases, representing the 7th highest total in the world, and more than 9,000 deaths.
If the virus continues circulating, we must be responsible and take care of ourselves. The change in strategy in the quarantine is not to say, go out, the virus has disappeared. The virus will not disappear until the efforts from science can find a vaccine. In the meantime, we will live with it.
Colombian authorities reported that the unemployment rate in May increased by 79.8% compared to the same month last year. The statistics revealed that this year some 5 million people lost their jobs in different commercial and administrative sectors. Specialists pointed out that there were 3 million more unemployed people in May as compared to the same month last year. And workers at Colombia's majority state-owned oil company Ecopetrol entered the 6th day of protests outside the company's headquarters this Tuesday. The protesters formed a human chain to express their rejection of the policies implemented by the government of Ivan Duque during the COVID-19 pandemic. Workers denounced the privatization of the company, which would result in the dismissal of nearly 400 employees. The Venezuelan government has insisted that the International Court of Justice has no jurisdiction to rule on the Essequibo territorial dispute with Guyana, and that the Geneva Agreement is the only valid mechanism to resolve the dispute.
The Geneva Agreement, signed on February 17, 1966, to reach a practical solution to the territorial dispute of the Essequibo, establishes the mechanisms to reach the political negotiation, peaceful mechanisms in order to avoid a territorial dispute that may become a military conflict, creating instability in both countries.
Mexico is seeking international financing from the Davos World Economic Forum for the development of 4 possible COVID-19 vaccines. Mexican authorities joined the forum's Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations in May and have presented the 4 vaccine candidates in order to receive investment. The Ministry of Health assured this is a priority for Mexico and that if the coalition does not provide financial support, the government is willing to assume the responsibility for the development of these vaccines.
Say the testing kits are coronavirus and deliver results within.
The head of the Cuban Medical Brigade in Andorra highlighted the results achieved during the first 3 months spent fighting the coronavirus pandemic in the small European country. Dr. Luis Enrique Perez, speaking via video conference from the Andorran capital, stressed that 39 Cuban health professionals have helped flatten the curve of the novel coronavirus epidemic. He noted the positive results in the treatment of 821 critically ill patients who were taken care of by Cuban professionals in the intensive care unit of the Nuestra Señora de Merex del Hospital, the only hospital in Andorra. And the Director General of the Andorran Healthcare Service thanked the Cuban government for its solidarity with countries affected by the pandemic.
First, we have to thank the Cuban government for its solidarity with those countries that have been affected by COVID-19 pandemic. Our thanks especially to Deputy Minister Marcia Covas, with whom I had constant contact in the days before your arrival here. Please say thanks to her. And thank you all for the effort, for leaving your families behind, your friends, your workplaces, to come here to help Andorra, this small country, the location of which you possibly didn't even know, between mountains. But I'm certain that after all this time, you will take this back home with you, in your memories and in your hearts.
The small Caribbean island of Anguilla held general elections this Monday and is set for a change of government. The election saw the victory of the Anguilla Progressive Movement, led by Ellis Lorenzo Webster, which won 7 out of 11 seats in Parliament. The Anguilla United Front of outgoing Premier Victor Banks won the other 4 seats in the House. The elections were due to take place earlier this year, but were postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In its first statement after the victory, the Anguilla Progressive Movement stated that a new page had been written in the history of the country.
People of Anguilla in general, I say thanks for the trust and confidence that you have placed in our team and in me as your chosen leader and my colleagues as your chosen representatives. You have heard our case. You have believed our cause, and you have supported our message throughout.
And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Director General of the International Labour Organization has stressed the heavy impact the coronavirus pandemic has had on workers across the world, as the equivalent of 400 million full-time jobs have been lost during the first half of this year.
The figures that we're publishing today shows that the destruction of jobs is the equivalent of 400 million full-time jobs in the first half of the year. And this is a considerable increase over our previous estimate. That was at 305 million. So things are getting worse. The job crisis is deepening. Why is that? Simply because of the trajectory of the pandemic. We're not through this yet. It's a gradual trajectory in the upwards direction. It is a continuing process. But I think the key thing is the geographic spread. We've seen this pandemic go across the world from its origins in Asia and Pacific and now hitting particularly hard the Americas, where we see the loss of jobs as being the worst in the world. The average across the world is now 14% reduction in work done. In the Americas, that's at 18.3%. And in South America in particular, the highest in the world, we're nearly at 20%.
The President of the UN General Assembly, Tijani Mohamed Bandi, convened a virtual high-level meeting to elaborate strategies to eradicate poverty worldwide. The meeting, which began this Tuesday, will be the first of a series of yearly symposiums that form part of the Decade of Action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. Mohamed Bandi also warned that 42 to 66 million children could be in a situation of extreme poverty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The official stressed that 1 out of 5 youngsters in the world is unemployed unemployed and without access to education. The director of the Pan American Health Organization has applauded certain Caribbean nations for the successful response to the coronavirus pandemic, but warned against lifting restrictions too fast.
Past week, Manaus in Brazil saw its first day without reporting new deaths from COVID-19 after weeks of dealing with high mortality. Several Caribbean countries and territories were able to curb transmission completely and have reported no new cases for several weeks. But they need to remain vigilant for months to come, as we are seeing countries, states, and cities that do not embrace preventive measures or relax restrictions too soon can be flooded with new cases.
And in the United States, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo criticized President Donald Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic during a press conference. The governor stressed that the White House had systematically downplayed the threat of the coronavirus and that the federal response has been inadequate. Cuomo urged President Trump to sign an executive order making face masks mandatory, as was done in New York 2 months ago. He also highlighted that the rapid reopening promoted by Trump has had no positive effect on the economy.
The president can do two things. First, sign an executive order directing everyone to wear a mask. How we're at this point as a nation, and we still haven't done the simple, easy, minimal step of saying you must wear a mask when you are in public.
And the unemployment rate continues to rise in the United States in the midst of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. According to data published by the Department of Labor, almost 48 million Americans have applied for unemployment insurance. Analysts say the figure is above estimates and that the situation is worsening. In addition, in the last 24 hours, Medicare service centers reported that at least 500,000 workers signed up for subsidized health coverage after losing their jobs. In France, hospital staff marched to the Ministry of Health in Paris to demand more resources from the French government following the crisis in the public health system sparked by the coronavirus pandemic.
It's not me that's annoyed, as you can see, because it's the doctors that have walked out, and just like the 6 billion for all the healthcare personnel, there are demands. They are not new. The government should be ready to meet these expectations. It has lasted months and months, over a year now, hospital staff, but more broadly, the medical social sector as a whole has been mobilized, so it's high time to move from diagnosis to solution. And for the time being, it's not only me who is annoyed, as you can see. The response must correspond to what health sector personnel, both healthcare workers and non-healthcare workers, are expecting. We applauded them a great deal. We had some very fine words for them. We thanked them at the time when the crisis was at its most tense and acute, because we knew that we needed them. And that cannot be translated today as a thank you, good evening. So now the response has to be up to scratch. Our negotiations should not be the starting point.
The United Kingdom continues to see rising COVID-19 cases and deaths, with the official figures falling short of the reality. Despite this, the Conservative government is pushing to reopen the economy. In this context, the city of Leicester has become the first part of the country to be put under a local lockdown following a spike in coronavirus cases. The move has sparked diverse reactions among residents.
I think they've got a lockdown, definitely. And I've got my reservations about the mayor, because the mayor was very, very dithery. He was saying that, we should have lockdown, then we shouldn't have lockdown. There's no evidence at all. But the thing is, right, he could have gained the evidence. He seemed very, very dithery, and like every politician, right, he sort of...
That's happening. I think people won't like being treated differently. I think people will... I booked a table on Saturday for a beer. I wanted a local beer from a local pub. But as soon as I was told I couldn't, I felt this impulse to go to Nottingham or something. I know it's stupid and I don't want to do that, but people don't like being controlled.
We heard about Leicester having problems 2 weeks ago. Nothing was done by the government until 2 days ago, when they started spreading rumours that they're going to possibly enforce a lockdown. And then yesterday they've gone ahead and done that, even though I don't see the need for it at the moment. I know they've come out with some figures, but I don't know if entirely how accurate they are.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Chinese authorities have stressed they firmly oppose the attempts by the US government to stir up trouble between the Asian nation and African countries. The comments were made in response to US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's recent statements regarding the extraordinary China-Africa summit on solidarity against COVID-19. On June 24th, Pompeo alleged that China's financial assistance to Africa is creating what he called an unsustainable debt burden in the continent. Pompeo also claimed that the Chinese government hid information about the novel coronavirus outbreak from the rest of the world.
We hope the US can truly focus on its own epidemic prevention and control measures and make concrete efforts that are conducive to the global cooperation on epidemic containment, instead of spreading political viruses by throwing accusations and smearing other countries' anti-epidemic efforts. The international community, including African nations, is clear who is sincerely helping Africa and who is trying to politicize the debt issue. Any sinister attempt to stir up trouble in China-Africa relations will be in vain and is doomed to fail.
Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam stressed on Tuesday that the Special Administrative Region is not afraid of any sanctions that may be imposed by the United States.
The impact on Hong Kong won't be too great. Just as I said, we may find alternatives to many products in other places. We will not be frightened by any sanctions as we are prepared. When necessary, I believe that our country will also take countermeasures. If necessary, we will do our best to cooperate with the central government when it adopts countermeasures at the diplomatic level.
Leaders of the G5 Sahel Joint Force held a meeting in Mauritania on Tuesday to address operational military readiness to combat terrorism across the Greater Sahara area. The meeting was attended by French President Emmanuel Macron and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Supported by the United Nations, the African Union and the European Union, the G5 Joint Force was launched in 2017 as part of efforts to combat terrorism in the Sahel region, made up of Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger.
Coalition que nous avons annoncée à Pau il y a 6 mois est en place.
The coalition we set up in Pau is in place. Europe, its institutions, its member states, our partners, our American partners, our neighboring countries, they are all present. And we are by your side because we are all convinced that victory is possible in Sahel, and that is decisive for peace in Africa and in Europe. We are back on track with it thanks to the efforts made over the last 6 months. We have reorganized a lot of things. We have improved our efficiency in the fight against terror. We have shared information better, succeeded in setting up a coordination center in Niamey, and had a spectacular results over the last few weeks.
The debt service burden for our countries has become unbearable. It absorbs a significant portion of our national budget. The regional and international organization, as well as the creditors, as far as we are concerned, must find a formula. And the right formula for their initiative and efforts would be an international summit on this debt.
Health authorities in Morocco offered an update on the COVID-19 situation on Tuesday. The Health Ministry reported 243 new COVID-19 cases, bringing the total to over 12,500. Meanwhile, the death toll stands at 228. Since June 25th, economic and social activities have resumed in Morocco following the end of a nationwide lockdown. In Lebanon, a member of parliament for the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party has said that Israel's decision to begin gas and oil exploration in the disputed water zone known as Block 72 is a declaration of war and an act of piracy. MP Qasim Hachem also demanded sweeping action to put a stop to Israel's aggressions. Meanwhile, Lebanese President Michel Aoun warned that Israel's intentions are extremely dangerous and that they would complicate the situation in disputed areas. On Tuesday, the Lebanese Supreme Council of Defense will meet to address the Israeli plans. Nigeria and Senegal have eased some restrictions put in place to stop the spread of the novel coronavirus. In Nigeria, interstate travel is being allowed and national flights are set to resume. Universities and schools will reopen for senior year students, however elementary schools and kindergartens will remain closed. Nigeria has reported over 25,000 COVID-19 cases and almost 600 deaths. Meanwhile, in Senegal, the state of emergency and curfew are set to be lifted on July 1st, and from July 15th, borders will be reopened and international flights will resume. Senegal has reported more than 6,000 COVID-19 cases and over 100 deaths. This Tuesday, the Democratic Republic of Congo marks 60 years since it gained its independence from Belgium. 6 decades later, liberation leader Patrice Lumumba remains a giant in people's minds both at home and abroad.
Lumumba is the symbol of hope for us young Congolese because he represents a lot. He is a patriot who gave his life for the development of the country. He is a patriotic example for us young Congolese so that after our studies we can dedicate our lives for the country. To be a Lumumbist today is to lead the fight so that the Congo is free to choose its economic partners, according to the Congo's own interests, which is not always the case.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.